UX plays a pivotal role in product design. The relationship between the product manager and the UX designer is extremely important. But what is UX? And how does one become a UX designer? Well, that's exactly what I cover in this episode of the Product Mastercast. Remember to like and subscribe for more industry-related videos. Taking your time out on a weekend as well. But yeah, I think to start off, do you mind just introducing yourself to the viewers? Tell us about yourself and just kind of where you're at the moment.
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm practice lead for UX and UI design at DBT. I'm currently working on my PhD in health humanities, and yeah, I look after our designers. I give talks and workshops from time to time, and generally try and motivate people and encourage people to grow and learn in the UX design industry.
Oh, fantastic. So you're studying then as well?
Yeah, so I have a second job essentially, which I do part-time after hours.
I totally get it. I'm also busy studying through uni, so it's quite the juggle,
Okay.
hey?
It is. What are you studying?
BCom in business informatics. So it's very much in line with this industry. So it's quite fun.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's challenging, but fun. Yeah. So the big thing for me that I'd like us to chat about today is, like I've said, a lot of people come and ask me about, getting into UX. They've studied some form of design, graphic design. I don't know. Design is quite a broad, thing to do and to study, and everyone's, getting interested in the tech space of design. So can you just kind of tell us, what is UX in your eyes, and just to kind of give it a breakdown for the people listening?
Sure. So you get UX design and UI design. User experience design, it's the way that things work and the way that things are formed and function and the way that you structure information. So it's moving away from just the way that it looks. It's the way that you actually interact with things. So it's also sometimes called information design or information architecture. There's lots of different parts to it. And it's very much the way that you interact with things and the way that you experience things generally on a screen. It can extend into the real world. So if you are designing, for a museum kiosk, which is digital, for instance, that's also information, UX design, but you need to consider then things like how tall are people, how can they reach the top of the screen. So I'm sure you've seen those screens in the mall, and they sometimes place things right at the top. So if you have someone that's short or someone in a wheelchair, child, they can't reach that high. So all those sorts of things then go into the real world, where you start thinking about physical limitations if you're not just designing for a phone or a laptop screen. So there's lots of different aspects to it, and it can just be on a screen, or it can include the more physical spaces as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm realizing when I tell people what I do in the space that I'm in, we talk about, the digital space or digital products. They don't realize the intricacies of the design that goes behind it and the experience. It's quite a new industry. Well, I think it's maturing now, and we're not just talking South Africa. I think around the world, this UX thing only really started kicking off, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago?
So the term user experience design was actually coined by Don Norman in 1993 when he was working at Apple, and he made his own title, which was user experience architect, I believe. I stand corrected on that. But so the term has been around since like 93, and the concept has been around a little bit longer than that. But UX as an industry and as a design field hasn't been around that long. You're completely right. When I studied design, I studied information design at the University of Pretoria. And we did like digital design and web design as like a project. It wasn't that big of a thing. When I started working, I started in advertising, and UX wasn't really a thing. So I did a lot of digital design, and looking back, I applied a lot of UX principles. For instance, when people designed a banner, like a website banner, they would often, put the entire URL on there. And I'm like, guys, this button's clickable. Like, we can just actually make it go to the URL. You don't need to type it out.
Such a basic concept, right?
silly basic things like that. But people were used to print design where you had to, physically spell it out. They weren't used to that level of interaction that you
Wow,
could have.
it feels so
So
archaic as you're saying it out loud. I'm like, wow, who does that? But yes, there was a time when that was a real thing.
it was because people didn't think of the way that you interact with the screen. They were used to, you're just designing for pages. And so looking back, I sort of always started applying these principles subconsciously. And then when I started learning about the field of UX and learning about it in a more like concrete way, that there are so many like UX design is not, oh, I think my opinion is that I'm going to do this. No, the stuff that we do, it's very much based in fact and science, and we look at research to look at what best practice is. And best practice is based on what could be the best way to do something based on research that's been done. So it's not a subjective thing. It's not a thing that my opinion is that this and this would make this app better. It's the research has shown that this and this would make the app better. So
Mm.
I think that's where people sometimes get stuck with UX design, because when you look at something like graphic design, it's a lot more focused on the visuals. Sometimes it can be conceptual,
Mhm.
but you're designing something and then someone will look at it. We are not designing for ourselves as UX designers. You're designing for someone else.
That's a very big
Um,
concept, actually, all on its own, right?
It is. It's the whole principle that you are not the user. You are not the person that will be using this thing. Most of the time, I'm not the target market that will be using the app or the website. So I can't put my own bias into it for what I think would be best, because I'm not the person that matters, quite frankly. So
Mm.
there's very much this separation of self and your design, where you're very much designing for other people and you need a lot of empathy to understand what those people are thinking.
Yeah.
Empathy is one of those, like one of the core things of design thinking,
Mm.
that we were chatting about earlier.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's such an important concept, just that you can't put your own bias and your own opinions and so on into your design, because uh, you're not the one that matters in this scenario.
Mm.
So
You
yes.
know, the concept that that's ringing so hard in my head is the fact that you just think of the word or the U in UX, the user. It's like it's in there, it's embedded in what you do. And I do feel like, so I play product owner, product manager, and when I'm dealing with a client and they want to build something, I feel like that is probably one of the biggest mistakes they tend to do, is kind of thinking about from their point of view. They're building it, their idea, they get it, they understand it, but you need to think of that who's the users. You got to empathize with them. You got to understand what they are going to experience, what they are going to be doing, the buttons they are going to be pressing. And it's such an
Yes.
important thing, right?
Yeah, I've had people come to me and say, like, you can't use this kind of button because I don't like it when my phone does that. It's like, okay, but I understand you're the product owner, but have you asked the people that will be using this how they want to interact with it?
Mm.
And the concept sometimes it's a strange one, because it's something that you are very close to and you're very attached to, but it's very easy to forget that you're not designing for yourself. Well, in most cases you're not designing for yourself,
Mm.
or you are maybe one of thousands of people that will be using it, and they have very different opinions and very
Exactly.
different ways that they use things and different ways that they interact. So
Mm.
yeah, you need to keep that into consideration.
No, absolutely. If I think about, once you release a product or a feature, whatever it is, the whole goal is to get thousands of people on it. So you need to understand that, 5 people using it versus 1,000 people. You need to understand that, I don't know what you would call it, but just that ratio of how many more people you have to cater for, and just the different kinds of thinking and how they perceive this experience using this thing is going to be. So yeah, very big concept.
Mm.
Something that I've come to realize in my role when I'm dealing with UX, I think when we starting projects, when you're starting conceptualizing a feature, the role in UX seems to be really in that solution space. And I want your opinion and your feedback on that that journey of like uncovering what's going to happen. Like, you guys as UX designers, dive really deep into understanding what's going to happen when you start designing this, or when it's going to get built and when it's going to get used. Can you just explain that journey? I think we spoke about empathizing. That's obviously the first side of things, but just how do you feel in that role? How important is it as a UX designer to dive so deep into that space?
I think it's an incredibly important aspect of it. I like solving problems, and that's why I like this job. Um, because what it comes down to is you get a brief, and this brief says, okay, we want X. It is your job as the designer to not just say, okay, we're going to solve X. It's your job to ask, do we even need to solve this? You need
I
to
like that.
take a step back, and even it becomes a bit philosophical, but sometimes you have this brilliant idea for a product, but the market doesn't want it because maybe the market's already oversaturated with it. Or maybe this problem that you're trying to solve isn't actually a problem, it's a symptom of a bigger problem. So you're just patching holes instead of actually solving the problem. So that kind of exploration where you really try and understand why you are solving this problem, it's incredibly important, because it doesn't matter how amazingly well you solve this problem if this isn't the problem that you should be solving in the first place.
Yeah.
If it's just a symptom of a bigger problem, you're just going to end up with a very patchy website that's very like you're solving lots of problems, but the overall picture, uh, it's not that great. And that's why, like, you'll find that the more senior a designer becomes, generally the more you zoom out. So as a junior designer, you're focusing on the screen that you've been given to design. And as you become more senior, you sort of zoom out constantly until you get to the point where you're like, okay, should I even be designing this screen? Is this the right thing, the right concept that I should be working on in the first place? And it's hard, because sometimes you have a client who briefs you on something and you have a feeling that this isn't going to work well, but you need to test it and then get feedback from people, and then they can tell you, because again, you're not designing for yourself. So you might have a feeling that something isn't quite the right suggestion, and you can give that through to the client and explain to them that I'm not sure, but let's go and test it. So usability testing becomes very important in this aspect, where you need to get people's insights for how something should be working and whether you are solving the thing that they want to be solved.
Yep. I think we can just end there. Thank you very much for joining me today. No, that was great. Thank you. No, I thought that was awesome. And for anyone watching, just pause, rewind, play that again. I thought you summarized that very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. I completely agree. Yeah, we do get fixated on the screen. Is this the right button? Is this in the right place? But then just actually, do all those cosmetics, is it correct yet? Let's take a step back. Love the concept. Definitely very well said. I like that a lot. So then that maybe brings me to your Medium article about UX/UI. So do you want to just explain the difference between UX and UI then?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, UX design very much focused on the information architecture, how everything is structured. It usually, if you're busy with UX design, it goes up to wireframes. So black and white designs, no images. You're looking literally at the structure of the information. So you want to see how you're placing things and how things will interact. Now, user interface design, that's the beautiful part. So that's where you start adding your gradients and your drop shadows and the beautiful curves and round edges. That being said, the user interface can affect the experience very much. I found a lovely, terrible example the other day where they had a start button on the website that was red and a stop button that was green.
So that
Now,
wasn't just an image that they found, it was an actual site. I
yeah,
saw that on your
apparently.
article. I was like, what is this? It's horrible.
Yeah, and it broke my brain because that, like, you are intuitively used to green being start or go and red being stop. And by changing the colors, it's such a simple thing, but your brain goes, wait,
Mm.
am I clicking the red start button, or
Mm.
your brain just it doesn't compute. So the interface can very much affect how people interact.
Mm.
So it's very important to keep that in mind.
Mm.
Yes, an interface should be beautiful and engaging and all of that, but it also shouldn't be distracting.
Mm.
um, Someone should look at your app and go through the process, and at the end go, wow, like I managed to complete my task, not,
Mm.
oh wow, that button was pretty. I don't
Yeah,
think I've ever heard someone say, oh,
exactly.
that
That's
button was the best button ever. That's
mm.
not the point of why they're doing this. We're not artists. We're not creating something that should be just looked at.
Mm.
We're creating something that people want to do something with.
Mm.
And if you can help them to do that thing a little bit easier, then you've achieved your goal.
Okay. Yeah, it makes me think of one of my current products that we're busy wrapping up, and we went for the kind of agile approach where to do, doing, and done as actually within the app. And I found out during this process that green is normally seen as the done part. So associating green with done, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Started seeing it. Now I see it everywhere. It's just interesting that, like, your example of start is green and stop is red, and then when it comes to when you click something off, so for example, if something's red, it's urgent, it's a problem, right? So you want it in red. But if it's green, it's calming. So it's more like, okay, cool, you finished this task. I was like, I never thought about it like that. And it's a nice concept in terms of the UX and UI and how they talk to each other.
No, definitely. And there's lots of psychological things with color,
Mm,
where, if you want someone to do something a bit more urgently, or so on, red, orange, yellow, that makes them energized and
mm,
make them move through things quickly. You'll find that fast food companies, so if you think of KFC, McDonald's, they use bright colors. And
mm,
it's because those colors actually stimulate appetite and they
mm,
make you eat a meal quicker. Whereas restaurants where they want you to sit down and relax, they tend to use more blues and greens, because they're calming, you can sit and chill. So there are obviously exceptions, but
mm,
there's a lot of color psychology
mm,
research that has been done. And what's interesting is it's obviously culture specific. So I think blue is the color of mourning in China, for instance,
okay.
where we would never associate that. We are used to black being the color of mourning. So
We do.
mourning, as in, um, yes. And, it's just interesting things like that. And I think,
Mm,
especially in a country like South Africa, where we have such a melting pot of different cultures, it's very important to be sensitive to that.
mm,
And even the symbols that you use to indicate certain things on apps, it's not universal. So
mm,
even within our multiple cultures in South Africa, one symbol on a button might mean something to one group and something completely different to a different group.
mm,
So it's very important to be aware of that.
mm,
And again, usability testing to check that you
mm,
are actually conveying the messages that you're hoping that you are.
mm. But it's also, again, talks to the empathize, right? Empathizing is to understand those users. It's like the building blocks of everything we want to build and design is just the users. And I think we are definitely getting more user centric in our approaches to building things, which is great. And yeah, I think in South Africa, we're getting there. Um, so for somebody that wants to become a UX designer or get into UX, do you want to maybe explain how you kind of got into it, or just sort of what advice would you give to somebody that wants to become a UX designer?
So on my side, I think I've been very lucky throughout my career that I've had the opportunity to work on a number of digital projects. And then when I left advertising, I moved into a role where I was working as a little bit of a front-end developer, like HTML, CSS coding, and then also interface design.
Mm-hmm.
We were working with white label solutions for the most part, so we didn't have that much control over the way that it worked necessarily, but we were skinning it and we were making suggestions to improve the UX, even though at the time I didn't necessarily realize that's what I was doing.
Mm,
Um, And so I moved into that role, and from there I moved to a different company where I worked on a purely like UX and user interface role. And the most important part and the most important aspect of getting a job in UX, I would say, is your portfolio.
Okay.
And that's a hard thing if you don't work in the industry to actually build up that portfolio. But there are definitely things that you can do to build up a portfolio that shows your process and your thinking. It's
Okay.
not just about the beautiful screens at the end, because as I said, we're not artists. We don't just create the beautiful things, we create the functional things.
Mm.
And we want to know, what was your process? What was your thinking when you solved this problem? What was the problem? How did you approach it? What was the rationale? And you can literally design a website for your dog, if that
Mm.
is what makes you happy. Like, you can
Yeah.
make up fake projects for yourself. And so as part of this, there's a project that I'm involved in. They're called She Can Do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nonprofit organization. It started as a meetup,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously now everything's digital at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we started a portfolio building session, program, which is a month long. So we briefed the candidates on like the different things. They each got their own project. One was to redesign CNN, for instance. Other one was to create an app to find a housemate, whatever it might be. So these are people that are working in different careers, architecture and marketing and business analysis, and they want to move into UX. Now,
Okay.
the hard part about creating a project on your own is you don't have feedback. So it's difficult to get those really good insights because you're still learning. So the idea of this is we have a group of, I think we're 5 senior designers that act as the mentors for this program. So they had 2 weeks to then go and design their projects. They presented it to us on Wednesday evening this week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 days ago. And now we have a week to give them feedback. And then they're going to spend another week refining their apps or their websites and their ideas, and then they'll present to us again. And that then
Fantastic.
gives them a project that they can put in their portfolio. So that's
Brilliant.
something that I'm very excited about. And we'll be running the session again throughout the year, or I'm not sure when.
That's
But
fantastic. I had no idea. I wish I knew that before we started our conversation. That's really cool.
sorry, I forgot to mention that.
No,
Um, but yeah, so Inez Patel, she's the organizer, and she does a lot of great work, specifically trying to build a community for people that want to get into the UX space, but that don't know where to start.
yeah.
So it's a lovely, inclusive group. We are based
Cool.
in Joburg,
Okay.
but when we have virtual events, obviously everyone is more than welcome to join.
Fantastic.
Um, and I would highly recommend it. Like, I love
Mm.
going to the events because I always
No,
learn a lot from everyone else.
I think
And
that is one of the best things. I don't know if it's just a South African thing, and I don't think it is. It's just the community that's in this whole space. They're all very willing and helping to sort of build each other. It doesn't feel like it's a competition. It's more of a, how can we help each other? I love that. So please send me the
exactly.
links. We can put them in the descriptions. So everyone watching, please have a look out for them. I think that's great. I'll definitely be sending people in that direction for sure.
So,
So yeah, you spoke about being involved in front end. I always think of as something that happened at a company I was working at. The UX designer who was relatively junior, someone that was looking to get into the space. So she was an intern and she was busy designing something on a screen, and the front end developers walked past the screen and they literally stopped and like, uh-oh. And I was like, what's up? They're like, no, we have to build that. And they were like, oh no. And so the conversation started going. Anyways, so with that in mind, you spoke now about the front end developer. You actually have some of that experience. How does that relationship work with front end, and is that a barrier for somebody trying to get involved?
so people always have this question on this debate about should designers code. And my personal opinion is I don't think it's necessary. I think it's important to understand how things are put together. So
Mm.
I have very limited experience. I would not trust myself to put code into production.
Mhm.
And I'm amazed that people have, but yes.
Yeah.
Um, like, I think it's important to understand, if you're designing for iOS or Android or a website, to understand the limitations of what you're creating.
Mm.
because it makes your job easier if you understand the limitations from the beginning. And then also to work very, very closely with your developers. I really believe that there needs to be a very close collaboration between designers and developers, because as you said, otherwise you end up with something where the devs go, oh my. And you never want to upset your developer. It's in the same way that you don't upset your waiter because they're working with your food. You don't want to upset your dev because they are working with your baby that you are creating. And it's a lot of compromise and a lot of back and forth between design and dev, because the designers sort of create this ideal version and the devs go, okay, that's going to take a year to build and I'm never going to sleep. So then you go, okay, wait, but I like you, so I'm not going to make you work overtime.
Yeah.
We're going to scale it down and do this. But it's important to have that relationship so that when you go to the dev and say, listen, I know that this one thing or two things or three things are really hard to implement, but it's really important for the user experience. They understand that you're not trying to make their lives difficult. This is actually something important, and they then work with you to find a solution for that.
100%.
And it's that give and take, and it's very much an organic relationship. So if there's one word of advice that I can give everyone listening, it would be kind to your dev and make good friends with them.
That's very interesting. So I have a question that's actually more pointed towards the product owner, product manager, because, or Scrum Master as such, because I completely agree with you that it's about those relationships. And I feel that the Scrum Master, if you have one, or the product owner, product manager that's involved in there, is to, what's the word, build up the relationships between the parties. Do you feel like it sits in their court? And if so, what advice would you give to product managers and product owners? If it's not them, what advice would you give them anyways? What is the pain point that you feel they should understand?
In terms of building those relationships?
Yeah, so building that environment for everyone to, again, not piss people off, or like just to make sure that those relationships are held, and that, because beautiful things can come when the relationships are strong. I've seen it in play. It's beautiful when you have a UX designers, your developers, and everyone's around the table and they're just all empowered to come up with solutions. It's beautiful. So yeah, what advice would you give to people that need to look after those relationships and make them build up?
I'd say it's really important to make sure that your team feels heard and feels supported. When people feel that they're being listened to and when they raise concerns, you're actually listening to them. It makes them a lot more willing to listen to you when you have things to say, where you're not just throwing like barking orders at them or telling them what to do or micromanaging their time. If you give them the room to sort of express themselves a bit and give them a little bit more freedom, people tend towards forming those relationships quite naturally. And I think it's important to foster that and to it's a hard thing, like fostering relationships and creating that like a healthy team dynamic. It's hard. But I think it's important that people feel that they can speak up without being punished. So if something is going wrong, which sometimes happens on project through no one's fault, it's important to also then not point fingers and say like you messed up, because it is likely that the ball was dropped in several places before it got to that point. Very often when you see devs struggling to meet deadlines or when the wrong thing is being built, it's not necessarily only their fault. It could have been that, the wrong brief was given in the first place, or time management up front wasn't
Things
great.
change, right?
Exactly. Things change constantly. And you only see like the outcome of those decisions higher up when it gets to development sometimes. And it's important to have the team feel that, they have a say in how they're working. So not just telling them like, you will have this done by Friday. And then they look at you and they go like, what?
What are you doing to me?
Exactly. So it's hard because sometimes you do have those like hard deadlines that you do need to meet. And I think it's important to just support people and make them feel like, listen, we know this is a tough time. Like, we know we've been working overtime for the past 2 weeks. We'll give you, a few days off to make up for it.
So you've spoken a lot about user testing, and I've been trying to save it for later, which is now. Um, so yeah, I've come to realize the importance of user feedback, getting your product into users' hands. Just tell us about your experience, and what is the advice you would give product managers again, or people that are UX designers that are designing products, the importance of user testing.
Mm. So when it comes to usability testing, it's really important, as I've said earlier, to really understand whether this product is solving what people need it to and whether it's working in the way that people need it to.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different kinds of usability testing. And it really depends on the project, what is right for that project. So I've been in projects where I've done user interviews. So you'll give someone a prototype to work with on the laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of probing them and asking them to explain their thought process as they're going along. So that's one way of doing it. And what's nice about it is you get to ask them like, okay, I see that you clicked there instead of there. Why?
Mm-hmm.
And they can give you that feedback. And it's really important to make very sure when you're looking at results from usability testing that you're looking at the why and not just the what. So as an example, another way of doing testing is actually getting, people in that do eye tracking for you and that can do some A/B testing, that kind of thing, a bit more scientific, where they can, measure brain waves and cognitive workload and all sorts of things like that. And we had a few projects where we've done that on. And what was quite dangerous is they picked up on the fact that people weren't finding a certain button and they decided to make it bright orange and like flashing. And they never bothered to ask why people weren't clicking on that button. They just assumed it was because people couldn't find it. And in retrospect, like it could have just been that people don't want to click on it. It was in order for the company to call you back. And maybe people didn't want that feature. So they didn't bother to ask that. They just looked at what was happening. So the fact that no one was clicking the button and then made a solution for that. They didn't go that one step further and ask, but why is no one clicking the button? So that's another way of doing testing. A/B testing can be done in a live environment. So you release two different versions of the app. I find it fascinating. You'll sometimes, and if you look for it, you'll notice it on like Google Maps and Facebook and so on, where your interface might look slightly different from your friends. And it's because they're testing two different versions on a live platform.
Really?
And I find it fascinating when I start noticing this. It makes me feel special that I'm part of, some test that they're conducting. And it's a way for them to see that, they've launched this slightly different feature. Maybe the layout is slightly different. Are people still completing the tasks in the same way? Is one like having a higher abandonment rate? Is the one going quicker? And it's a way to sort of from a distance see how people react. Again, with that, the hard thing is you can't ask people why. So if you start noticing certain patterns, you can't ask why it's happening, but it can be useful for certain types of things. And then you also get things like Google Analytics, and where you can see what pages people are on, where they're abandoning journeys, etc. So
yeah, it's a little bit more objective, so it's a little bit easier to figure out. It's like there is,
yes.
yeah.
So there's the qualitative research, which is like the interviews and asking people and surveys as well. And then the quantitative, which is looking at the data and the analytics and a bit more of a objective way of looking at the way people are interacting. And so you can hear it becomes quite a scientific thing when you get into it, or it can.
Exactly. It's not just that screen, right, that we spoke of a while ago. Yeah,
exactly. Like there's a lot of things that can go into it, and it's very like what you need to do for your project might differ. So one project A/B testing might be the right thing. For another one, actually having interviews with people might be another thing. So it really depends, and it depends on the project, but it is important to do some sort of testing. And another thing that people often ask is like, but how many people do I need to interview?
Yes.
And I can't remember where this comes from now, but there's research that has shown that if you interview 5 or 6 people, you can fix up to 80% of your website's errors.
I think
Or
that rings a bell, actually. Yeah, I think I've heard that.
yeah, it's one of those things that you see and hear a lot of places. I have no idea who said it or did the research,
Do
but
you believe in it? Do you think it's correct?
I do, just in the sense that if you do testing with 6 people, it's better than doing no testing. And you might start to find if you test 200 people, you start to find the same patterns. So you'll never be able to cover absolutely everything, but just doing some testing is better than nothing.
100%.
So I think that it's one of those curves where I don't know which way around it would go, but up to like 5 or 6 people, you get 80%. Then it's sort of very incremental after that. You're not
because
going
then
to
it just becomes a
necessarily.
whole bunch of opinions. I've said this on the podcast before, but yeah, I totally get that. Awesome. No, I think I had another question. You've answered it already. But yeah, I think this has been a great conversation and I feel like we could carry on. But yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up. And I want to ask you, you've already mentioned it to me earlier, but do you want to just kind of give the viewers and the listeners just, what are you up to at the moment? Any cool projects that are happening? And where can people find you or your projects, including the one that your non-profit?
Oh, yes. So there's a conference that a colleague and myself are launching. And I think by the time the podcast comes out, we will have launched it already. So I'm very excited about that. It's called DxZA, Design South Africa. And it's a design conference that Sanisha Naidu and myself have co-created and co-founded.
Fantastic.
And very excited for it.
Is it going to be a remote conference? When is it?
So it'll be a remote conference, 21st of January next year. And we are launching on the 21st of September. So as I said, by the time you guys watch this will be live already. You can go and check out our website, dxza.coza. We're looking for speakers, sponsors, and you can find all of this information on the website. Tickets are not live just yet. Just need to get a few more ducks in a row for that. But our whole idea is that we want to look at not just UX design, not just product design, not just customer experience design. We want to look at the intersections between all of these different disciplines: furniture design, industrial design, product owners, business analysts, developers. It's a very holistic conference that we want to create. And our theme for 2021 is actually intersectionality, and looking at the interplay of how these different disciplines influence each other and how they actually just make each other so much better, because it's in those little places where they intersect where you find really amazing things happening. So that's
Sounds amazing. Sounds intriguing.
Thank you. Well, I hope that you will join us as well.
I'll be there.
So that's one of the things that I'm busy with at the moment. You can find me on Twitter, Liz, LIZZ_S2. And then on LinkedIn as well, Lizette Spangenberg. Please,
yeah, I'll share all those. I'll share all that in the description with the guys. So LinkedIn, Twitter. I've seen you on Medium.
Yes, yeah, I'll share all my links with you. And then She Can Do, you can find them on Meetup and on Medium as well, and on Twitter. Lovely group of ladies that organize that. And further, as I mentioned, I'm busy with my PhD as well, looking at how human-centered design can improve radiology workspaces for doctors. So that's something that I'm very passionate about. I'm very lucky that I'm talking at an academic conference, the International Health Humanities Conference later this year. Sure. And very excited for that.
Go Liz. And, lots going on. I love it.
Yeah, I keep busy and I keep out of trouble.
Yeah, that makes two of us. Okay, Liz, thank you very much today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably catch up again, I reckon, before your conference. I think it'll be a nice way to sort of see how things are going leading up to it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.